Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
I'm Indy Neidell.
And I'm Burns.
And this is the Baseball History Time Machine.
And this is, episode 8?
This is episode 8. We've been doing this for 2 months now.
That's been a lot of fun.
It has, and we have a lot more to talk about because the episode ideas list is now over 60 episodes long.
Over 60, oh really?
Yeah, it was 50 last week, but it's...
Yeah, it's grown.
I walk around and I have an idea for something.
Yeah.
Cool. Like the one next week is something that was not on the list until like 2 days ago.
Uh-huh.
Right. If anybody out there has an idea for something from long ago that you think we might enjoy covering, do not hesitate to let us know at our Facebook page, Indy Neidell's Baseball History Time Machine, or the podcast YouTube channel of the same name.
And you can join us on Patreon too. You can chat with us there, and you can also get our content ad-free. And it's usually uploaded a couple of days early, right?
Yeah, I upload the week's episode there as soon as I'm done editing it, which is usually the Thursday or the Friday.
Okay, well, what are we going to talk about today?
Today, I'm going to finish up what I thought was going to be a single episode, but is now turned into a trilogy about the first African-American major leaguers.
We got one episode about the 19th century, one that turned out to be the Jackie Robinson one, and now...
This one is the other players from the late 1940s and early 1950s, the other first African-American
Okay, well, let's get down to it.
So as we saw last time, Jackie Robinson made his debut with the Brooklyn Dodgers April 15th, 1947. And it may surprise you to learn this, but 4 other black ball players made their debuts in the National League or American League already in 1947.
Really? I didn't know that. I thought that with Branch Rickey being so careful finding the right candidate for breaking the color barrier and having Robinson spend the season in Montreal in the minor leagues, it would have taken, a little bit longer, possibly.
Well, it didn't. Larry Doby made his debut with the Cleveland Indians already July 5th. That the American League began integration in Cleveland should come as no surprise to anyone, since Cleveland's owner was the always forward-thinking Bill Veeck.
Is it pronounced Veeck, not Veek?
Well, you think from its spelling that it's Veek, but it is in fact Veeck. And, in fact, his biography is called Veeck as in wreck. And it's a brilliant book. It's a really good, deep look inside the machinations in the front offices of the 1940s and 1950s. In fact, Burns, your homework is to read that book.
All right, sure.
So Larry Doby integrates the American League. So he's actually the first black player in AL games in all those major league ballparks that Jackie Robinson doesn't play in.
I've never actually thought about it like that.
And Doby had to go through most of the same crap Robinson went through in the National League.
Sure.
Doby said this later in life. The day I joined the Indians in Chicago, Lou Boudreau lined up all the players. Doby was saying now, referring to the manager and shortstop. One by one, Lou introduced me to each player. This is Joe Gordon, and Gordon put his hand out. This is Bob Lemon, and Lemon put his hand out. This is Jim Hegan, and Hegan put his hand out. All the guys put their hands out, all but 3. As soon as he could, Bill Veeck got rid of those 3. Doby was 23 years old, and he had been playing in the Negro Leagues and was coming off a stellar 1946 campaign with the Newark Eagles, in which he'd hit .365, just 4 points behind league leader and teammate Monty Irvin. Doby and Irvin were actually the keystone combo for the Eagles, Doby at second and Irvin at short.
You said last week that Doby and Irvin were 2 of Ricky's top choices to break the color barrier, but they happened to be still serving overseas in the armed forces at the time, right?
That is true, yes. Well, Doby returned from abroad with a vengeance, not just with that .365 average, but leading the league with a 1.030 OPS.
Did he continue this in the major leagues?
He did not at first, though I'm not there yet. Give me time. Doby began 1947 with the Eagles, right? Mm-hmm. And he was hitting .354 with a .218 OPS plus when he left them for the Indians. Now, Doby would end up after 1948 playing mainly center field. But in 1947, it was very different. He just about only was used as a pinch hitter with the Indians, appearing in the field in only 6 games, 4 at second, 1 at first, and 1 at shortstop.
So how often did he pinch hit, though?
24 times. He also pinch ran once. He only started one game, actually, and that was on his debut day. It was a doubleheader, and in Game 1, he batted once as a pinch hitter and struck out, and then he started Game 2 at first base.
This is kind of like Jackie Robinson being moved to first. Had Doby played first before?
According to BaseballReference.com, he didn't play any first base for the Eagles, but according to Pulitzer Prize-winning sports columnist Dave Anderson, he sort of did. Okay, Doby says this. In the first game of a doubleheader that day, I struck out as a pinch hitter, Doby recalled. Before the second game, Boudreau told me to play first base. I didn't have my first baseman's glove, but the first baseman didn't want to let me use one of his. Joe Gordon had to talk him into it. Gordon was great to me. Before games, he was the guy who'd warm up with me.
So he owned a first baseman's glove at least. That's pretty suggestive, though.
It is that he had played first base before.
How was he treated around the league, though?
Okay, his words again. One time I slid into second base and the other team's shortstop spit tobacco juice on me. Some guys in the other dugouts would yell the N-word at me, but when I heard some guys in our dugout call Joe DiMaggio a dago after he hit a home run, I figured if they can call the best player in the league that, I wasn't going to worry anymore about what I was called.
Yeah, that's a pretty healthy attitude to have, I guess.
It didn't help him that much in 1947 because he was actually a bust, hitting 156 with a double being his only extra base hit in 32 at-bats.
But they didn't send him back to Newark or down to the minors.
No. He finished the season with the Indians and then came back in 1948 and he blossomed, hitting .301 with decent power as the Indians went to their first World Series since 1920, which they won over the Braves 4-2, and in which Doby hit .318 and gave the Tribe the lead in Game 2, drove in the winning run in Game 3 on a groundout, and homered in Game 4.
He became a pretty big star, right?
He sure did. In 1949, he was an all-star for the first of 7 straight seasons, and Doby had a great career. He led the AL in homers in 1952 and 1954, also in RBI in 1954, and he was second that year in the MVP voting. He led the league in slugging once, on base percentage once, twice in OPS+. Yeah, it was a really good career. He was a major star.
You could say that a lot of guys coming up hitting 156 wouldn't really make it back up again.
They would not, but how many of those guys were tearing up other leagues like Doby was? Neither Veeck nor Boudreau were stupid, and just pinch hitting, that is stressful work, and you only get that job if someone thinks you can hit. Doby's career OPS plus in the AL was 136, and he finished his major league career in 1959 with the White Sox, though he did not appear with them in the World Series that year since his last game was in July. He did, at the age of 38 in 1962, play 72 games with the Chunichi Giants in the Japanese Central League.
Oh, wow. I would have never guessed that he would have played in Japan.
He played there together with former Negro League and National League star pitcher Don Newcomb, who was 36 years old and no longer able to really pitch, but was a good enough hitter to continue as an outfielder and first baseman in Japan. Newcomb actually had a better year there than Doby did, out-hitting him 262 to 225 and out-homering him 12 to 10, but I am getting sidetracked.
You always do?
I always do.
Doby was shortlisted by Rickey, as you said, but did he have a similar background to Robinson?
It was similar enough. He had some advanced education, college at Long Island University on a basketball scholarship. And like Robinson, he grew up in a racially mixed neighborhood, though Robinson's had been predominantly white, as we saw. Doby's career in baseball continued after his playing days were over, and he became the second black manager in the major leagues when he skippered the White Sox in 1978, and they were owned by none other than Bill Veeck.
Oh, that's cool. Who's next on the list?
Next on the list are 2 St. Louis Browns, Hank Thompson and Willard Brown, who debuted in the American League July 17th and July 19th.
Yeah, I don't think I know these guys.
They were both players with the Kansas City Monarchs in the Negro American League. I'll start with Thompson, since he played with the Browns 2 days before Willard Brown. Thompson had an interesting path to the AL. He was already a regular for the Monarchs at the age of 17, and the next year was drafted into the U.S. Army, where he served as a machine gunner in Europe. He was discharged in July 1946 and returned to the Monarchs. In 1947, he appeared in 27 games with the Browns in July and August.
Was he also pinch hitting?
No, he appeared in 19 games at second base, although he was used as a pinch hitter 8 times. He was responsible, or partly responsible, for a few firsts. On July 20th, he and Willard Brown played second base and center field. So that was the first time since 1884 that two black players appeared in the same Major League lineup. In Game 2 of a doubleheader at Cleveland on August 9th, Larry Doby pinch hit, and that was the first time two black players appeared on the field against each other in Major League history. And yes, I'm aware that the Negro Leagues are now classified as Major Leagues, but I don't know how else to actually explain it.
Why did Thompson not play after August, though?
The Browns released him August 23rd, though he was hitting .256 for the last place Browns, which was better than their team average of .241 that year. But Thompson showed no power either. He had, though, been hitting .335 with the Monarchs and led the Negro American League in homers when his contract was bought in July by the Browns. Well, his and Willard Brown's. But according to a couple of sources, the contract was on a conditional basis for $5,000. And his and Brown's play was apparently not good enough for St. Louis to want to put up another $5,000 for the services. Thompson played for the Monarchs again in 1948, put up great numbers again in a full season there. And then in 1949, after battering International League pitching with the Jersey City Giants, he was called up by the big league New York Giants and made good there, hitting .280 over the rest of the season with decent power.
Wait, how did he end up at the Giants?
In early 1949, the Giants bought his and several other contracts from Jersey City, but there was something that had to be sorted out. A Jim Crow situation.
What, a Jim Crow law, like a segregation thing?
No, an actual guy named Jim Crow, whom Hank Thompson shot and killed in April 1948.
Okay, well, back up. Say what?
Before I continue, I will say again that the archives of the Sporting News are online and amazingly fun to read, and you can find all sorts of great stories there. I'm a SABRE member, the Society for American Baseball Research, and I get access through them, but there may be other ways to check it out. And you really should, and I'm saying that because I was reading about these stories in there. Back to Hank Thompson and James Crow. It seems that in April 1948, Thompson was heading to San Antonio for the Monarchs spring training, and he stopped in Dallas to visit his sister and her husband. They ran into Crow at a local bar, and Thompson and Crow knew each other from playing ball as teenagers. Crow threatened Thompson with a knife, and Thompson shot Crow. When he found out the next morning that Crow had died, he turned himself in. He was eventually ruled not guilty by justifiable homicide. Thompson began the year in Jersey City, as I said, and after playing great there for 47 games, was called up to the Giants, where he made the grade.
All right.
Yeah, all right. He had a decent career as the Giants' regular third baseman, although he hit badly in 1951 and spent a few months in the minors finding his stroke again. His best season was 1953, when he hit .302 with 24 homers and a .567 slugging percentage. And he hit .364 with a .611 on-base percentage in the 1954 World Series when the Giants swept the Indians.
.611 on base percentage.
Yep, he broke Lou Gehrig's World Series walks record by getting 7 of them in 4 games. He left the majors after the 1956 season at just 30 because both his average and his power levels had plummeted. He played one more year in AAA minor league ball.
Why did he finish up so young?
His last few years, he had a bunch of injuries to do it, but Thompson had problems with both alcohol and with his temper. According to the SABRE biopiece on him, Monty Irvin often watched over him to keep him out of trouble, but once Irvin was no longer with the Giants after mid-1955, it seems Thompson was more and more out of control. After his playing career ended, he got in some real trouble. He was arrested for car theft, for assault, and finally armed robbery in Houston in 1963.
That's quite sad.
He was apparently sentenced to 10 years, but turned his life around in prison and was paroled after 4. There's an article by him from Sport magazine in 1965 called How I Wrecked My Life and How I Hope to Save It. And he kinda did. After parole, he worked with problem teens in Fresno, and then he died young of a heart attack in 1969 at the age of just 43.
That's really, really young and really tragic.
I've read online, though I cannot find any contemporary sources backing it up, that there were plans for a movie of his life starring Sidney Poitier in the late 1960s.
I mean, I'd watch that movie. A teenage baseball star, machine gunner, and the James Crow thing, breaking into the Browns and then not making it, but coming back 2 years later, succeeding. 7 walks in the 1954 series.
Okay, Dusty Rhodes was actually the big star of that series, but anyhow.
Okay, his career ends while he's still young. A spiral like kind of a spiral into a life of crime and temptation, and then eventually redemption. And hell yeah, I'd watch that.
I would watch that too, actually, since you put it like that. They should do that movie about him.
And what about the other guy the Browns bought at the same time as Thompson? What was his name? Willie Brown?
Willard Brown. Brown is a Hall of Famer, actually, even though he only appeared in 21 games in the American League. All of them with the Browns in 1947, and none in the National League. Willard Brown was good. I mean, Robinson, Doby, Thompson, they were great, sure, but Willard Brown could flat out hit. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pause the recording and show you Willard Brown's page at baseballreference.com. Here, come around here, Bruce. I'm actually going to show you this.
Look. Oh my God.
Yeah.
He kind of like
That
crushed
guy could,
it.
that
Yeah,
guy
he
could
dominated.
Hit.
Yeah,
that
he
guy
dominated.
Could fucking hit.
He dominated.
Yeah.
He led the league in so many things, year after year after year. It's pretty amazing.
He appeared in 11 seasons with the Monarchs, beginning in 1937 when he was 22. Now, in 2 of those seasons, 1940 and 1944, he only had a handful of bats, and that's because in 1940, he was playing in Nuevo Laredo in the Mexican League, and in 1944, he went to serve in the Army Quartermaster Corps in Europe. Mm-hmm. In those other 9 seasons, 9. Okay, now these numbers are from baseballreference.com, but they're not the same exact numbers you find in other sources, which is the case with many Negro League stats, so I take it more as a guide than absolute gospel.
Okay.
In those 9 seasons, he led the league in hits 8 times, homers 6 times, RBI 7 times, runs scored 3 times, doubles 6 times, triples 4 times, RBI 8 times, again out of 9 seasons,
yeah.
WAR 7 times, slugging 6 times, OPS 4 times, total bases 8 times. Now, he only won 1 batting title, it seems, though he did top 400 once, and he averaged 358 overall with Kansas City.
I mean, those are staggering numbers. Those are like Ted Williams, Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth numbers, basically.
They are, but here's something interesting. Josh Gibson, who, if you look it up, actually put up even better numbers, and whom both black and white players mostly said was the greatest player of the Negro Leagues. Josh Gibson called Willard Brown Home Run Brown.
Home Run Brown.
But Home Run Brown had what many might call a flaw.
Okay, and what was that?
He had another nickname, Sonny. And Sammy Haynes, who played with Brown on the Monarchs for a few seasons, said that was because he was a Sunday player. Now this is a quote. Willard liked to play on Sundays when we had a full house. If the stands were full, you couldn't get him out. He could play baseball as good as he wanted to. If the stands were half empty, you might find Brown loafing that day. In fact, he didn't play on rainy or cloudy days. That's why we called him Sunny. He loved to play on sunny days and before big crowds. And he was a real crowd pleaser. And there are other reports, including by one player in Bill James' Historical Abstract, that claim Brown could have maybe been as good as Gibson if he took baseball seriously, if he waited for strikes, if he played hard every game, and not just when there was a big crowd.
But he still made the Hall of Fame.
That he did, and you know, who am I to cast stones anyway? And he made the Hall of Fame not because of the 21 games he played with the St. Louis Browns in 1947.
I'm going to guess that didn't go so well.
His signing was a big deal.
Okay.
And he and Thompson were supposed to get the Browns out of the American League cellar. And the Associated Press actually called him the prize of the African-American players who debuted in the National League and American League in 1947, including Robinson. And despite his age, Brown was 32.
That's so ancient.
So ancient. Well, there's a book about the Monarchs by Janet Bruce, though I have not yet read it. But this quote from Brown from that book is in the Sabre article about Willard Brown, if that makes sense, describing his reaction when he found out he was going to the Browns. The first time they told me I was going to the Browns, I didn't want to go to the Browns in the first place. I said, no, I wasn't going. But the other players just kept on. Why don't you go? Show them what you can do. And so he went. And he hit but 179 with 1 homer, an inside-the-park homer off Prince Hal Newhouser.
Yeah, but that doesn't seem like him, looking at those numbers from before.
You got to realize, St. Louis was the team furthest south. He took all sorts of abuse. He had unfriendly teammates. And unlike Robinson, he never had time in the minor leagues to adjust to things and being on tour and everything. But above all, in his own words, he really just wasn't happy. So in August, he and Thompson were released. Also, something else. Unlike Robinson and Doby, they had not brought in a financial windfall with loads more people in the stands. Remember, we talked about that last time.
We did.
Brown would later say they were offered a choice about whether they could leave or stay. And they did make more money with the Monarchs, actually. So I know I said earlier that had they stayed, the Browns would have had to pay a bunch more money, and this is probably true. But there's likely a bunch more to it that is obscured by the haze of history.
I mean, that's a shame. The guy seems to have been the real deal.
He obviously thought he had something to prove, though. He went down to Puerto Rico to play winter ball in the league there and won the Triple Crown, hitting .432, and set the league record with 27 homers, and Reggie Jackson has the runner-up number, which is 20. And Brown's 86 RBI in 60 games was second best all time, but don't worry, because 2 years later, he'd set the record with 97. Ruben Gomez, who later pitched 10 years in the majors as the second Puerto Rican player to reach the National League or American League, called him the most dominant player other than Willie Mays he'd ever played with.
He should have been challenging the likes of like Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio.
Well, here's a quote explaining what he thought of the St. Louis Browns. The Browns couldn't beat the Monarchs no kind of way. Only if we was all asleep. That's the truth. They didn't have nothing. I said, major league team? They gotta be kidding.
That's probably very true, though.
According to Seamhead's Negro Leagues database and BaseballReference.com, Brown's dominance extended to the 1948 season with the Monarchs, which was his best one statistically. Here's the thing. There are no numbers listed for him at those sources with the Monarchs after 1948 because numbers for the Negro Leagues stopped then.
How come?
To quote Alan... I have a lot of quotes today.
Yeah, got a
To quote Alan Cohen from the article Willie Mays' 5 Tools, by consensus, it has been deemed that the Negro Leagues died in 1948. The last Negro League World Series was played that year. Saber's book on the 1948 Homestead Grays and Birmingham Black Barons was titled A Bittersweet Goodbye. Seamheads, an authority on Negro League history, does not go beyond 1948. When Retro Sheet began doing individual game records, it began with 1948 and went backwards. So Willard Brown, from his bios, apparently played a couple more seasons with the Monarchs, but I can't give you any numbers about them. He did win another Triple Crown in Puerto Rico in the 1949-50 winter season there, and he did play until 1957 in Puerto Rico, Canada, Mexico, and the Texas League, and he was in his 40s by then, and yes, he hit well everywhere.
What happened to him after baseball, though?
He ended up in Houston in the late 70s of all places because that's where I grew up, and he was there until he died in 1996, and I left Houston to go to college in 1985.
I'm going to take it you guys never met? Or...
You know how cool that would have been?
Yeah.
But I would have been so annoying when I was like a teenager with so many questions. Maybe you would have enjoyed it. Who knows? But okay, I have to move on. I thought I was going to cover like 10 or 15 guys today, but that's not the case. But I will cover one more so we at least get the whole class of 1947.
Another African-American debuted in 1947?
Yep, and he did so also with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he was even Jackie Robinson's roommate.
Was it Don Newcomb?
No, and it turns out I will not get to him today. But it was the first black pitcher in the National League, first appearing August 26 for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and his name was Dan Bankhead.
So what's his story?
He's often overlooked today since he did not have a successful career outside the Negro Leagues.
What kind of pitcher was he, though?
Oh, he was a power pitcher with a serious fastball, although he had some control issues. But he could also hit all right and played the field at some stops on his baseball journey.
Okay, so since you say it like that, it sounds like there was a bit of a winding one.
It was, but that was par for the course then. Outside of Negro League service, he played in Puerto Rico, where he was a star, but he also played in Canada, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic. Fun side note, he had 4 brothers who also played in the Negro Leagues.
All 5 of them. Has any family ever done that in the white major leagues, so to speak?
Ed Delahanty's 4 brothers all played in the major leagues.
Really?
Yep, Tom, Jim, Frank, and Joe Delahanty all had major league careers.
Okay, were they any good?
Well, they were obviously not as good as Ed, but Jim had a pretty long career, and he was a good hitter. He finished in the league top 10 in some things a few times, in batting, slugging, homers, doubles. He was a rock-solid hitter. But back to the Bankhead.
Back to the Bankheads.
His 2 elder brothers played in the field, and his 2 younger ones were pitchers. Dan began playing for the Birmingham Black Barons in the Negro American League in 1940. He was from Alabama, by the way.
That's such a cool name for a team. And I'm guessing he was good, though.
He was good enough to pitch in the East-West All-Star Game in 1941 and again in 1946 when he came back from the war.
What was his service like?
He actually enlisted in the Marine Corps, though he was not with a combat unit. He was, though, allowed leave to pitch a couple times. In fact, I'm going to quote again. Here's a quote from the New York Times from June 5th, 1944.
Wait, June 5th, 1944, the day before D-Day?
That is the day before D-Day. And on June 4th, Dan Bankhead had been in New York for baseball. Here's the quote from New York Times. The Birmingham Black Barons, champions of the American Negro Baseball League, registered 2 shutout triumphs before 12,000 at the Yankee Stadium yesterday. In the first game, the Barons beat the Philadelphia Stars 9-0, and in the second, limited to 7 innings, they downed the New York Black Yankees 13-0. Al Gibson on the mound for Birmingham in the opener yielded only 2 hits. In the nightcap, Dan Bankhead struck out 17 and allowed only 3 hits.
Wait,
Yes?
I'm getting something. He struck out 17 batters in only 7 innings?
Yes. So obviously Bankhead had some good stuff. He left the service in June 1946 and pitched the rest of the season with the Memphis Red Sox of the Negro American League before starring in Puerto Rico in the winter. Bankhead started in 1947 again with Memphis. I should mention here that he was teammates with his brother Fred, who'd been playing mainly second base for Memphis since 1938. Dan got the win in the 1947 East-West All-Star Game, and yeah, he had by then really come to the attention of Branch Rickey.
I'm not surprised.
Thing is, Brooklyn had a pitching wrinkle. Kirby Higbee, who'd been one of their 2 aces on the 1941 pennant-winning club and who'd gone 17-8 and been an all-star in 1946, had been let go by Rickey because he refused to play ball with Jackie Robinson. But that's over 200 quality innings you've got to make up somewhere else. Soon enough, Rickey announced that Bankhead had been bought from the Red Sox for $15,000. Rickey would have preferred to get Bankhead ready for things in the minors, but he needed arms. So Bankhead first pitched in Brooklyn August 26 against the Pirates.
No pressure at all.
Tell me about it. No, I mean, really, it's tough to even imagine. But it didn't go well for Bankhead. He gave up 8 earned runs in 3 innings.
Ouch.
He did, though, hit a home run in his first at-bat. Well, he appeared only 3 more times the rest of the season for 10 innings total. And here's something interesting. BaseballReference.com, on his overview page, lists his ERA for the Dodgers in 1947 as .720, with 8 earned runs allowed in 10 innings, meaning those runs he gave up in his first appearance were all he allowed for Brooklyn in all of his appearances. However, if you click on his game logs for his Brooklyn appearances, it lists him as giving 2 more for a 9.00 ERA total.
Interesting. You'd think that a site like that wouldn't have those kinds of discrepancies.
You would, and I wrote him about it, but I wrote him a couple years ago about the fact that Hugh Duffy's page still has his 1893 .363 average in bold as a league-leading average, when in fact he finished 4th in the batting race. They haven't fixed that. Well, anyhow, Bankhead was on the World Series roster. Now, I talked all about the 1947 series last week, and he appeared only as a pinch runner in Game 5.
I mean, what a game.
Yeah, that was, yeah. If you haven't listened to last week, you got to go back and hear it.
You're missing out.
In 1948, the Dodgers had spring training in the Dominican Republic, and this was the first time for Major League ballplayers that the black and white players shared the same hotel. Bankhead was assigned to Class B ball for the season, where he shone, throwing a no-hitter and only missing a pitching triple crown by losing the ERA title 235 to 233. He finished the season going 4-0 in AAA ball and having none other than Satchel Paige say he threw faster than Bob Feller.
I mean, that's pretty fast.
That's pretty fast. In 1949, he pitched with the Montreal Royals, the top Brooklyn farm club. He went 20-6 and led the league with 176 strikeouts, but also had 170 walks. In 1950, he was back up with Brooklyn, with whom he recorded 9 wins, his only wins in the National League. He was settling in all right, but a sore arm derailed him as a starter. This was a recurring problem for him. He finished the year with a bunch of relief appearances, but though he was 9-4, he had a 5.50 ERA.
A lot of walks.
A lot of walks. He was 0-1 with the Dodgers in 1951, and 0-1 with the Montreal Royals in 1952 before being released. He still starred in Puerto Rico, but his strikeout totals were way down, so obviously he'd lost a lot of his heat. He had some colorful adventures in Dominican and Canadian ball, which you can read about at his Sabre bio, and then spent over a decade finishing his baseball career in Mexico.
So he really didn't do much at all in the National League.
Well, I can't say how much of that was because of pitching issues or arm issues. I think the racial abuse he took affected him more than, say, Robinson. I can't know, of course, but you read things like he said himself that a reason for not succeeding with the Dodgers was financial worries. He apparently couldn't find an apartment that would accept his kids, so they stayed in hotel suites, which ate up his salary. I'm not really sure how that worked, but that's what he said. And there's also this, a quote from his Sabre page from Negro Leagues legend Buck O'Neill talking to Satchel Paige's son. Here's what I always heard. Dan was scared to death that he was going to hit a white boy with a pitch. He thought there might be some sort of riot if he did it. Dan was from Alabama, just like your father, but Satchel became a man of the world. Dan was always from Alabama, you know what I mean? He heard all these people calling him names, making those threats, and he was scared. He'd seen black men get lynched.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy. That weighs on you.
Yeah, you can only try to imagine how much that might, scar you mentally, especially as a pitcher in front of a huge crowd.
Absolutely. And what happened to him after baseball?
He, too, actually ended up in Houston after Mexico. He worked deliveries for a service company, and he died of lung cancer in 1976.
So he wasn't that old either.
No, he was younger then than I am now. And with that little melancholy, I will end this episode, a tribute to the class of 1947. Robinson, Doby, Thompson, Brown, and Bankhead. True pioneers.
Now, when you think of what they went through, what they opened up about, they were heroes.
Yeah, you're right. They were heroes.
Good episode. Well, I guess good trilogy. Is there going to be a part 4?
Well, there will one day, because I actually was planning on covering the first 20 African-American major leaguers, and I realized that I talk more than I thought. So there will be one day to cover the rest of the first 20 in the late 40s and early 1950s. But I do have other stuff to talk about next week. There is a lot of baseball history out there.
There's a lot to cover.
Yeah. And if you out there would like to make it easier for us to do that, you can join us on patreon.com. Just look for Indy Neidell's Baseball History Time Machine. As we said, you also get ad-free content there. Yeah, I said that before. All right, well, that is it for this week from me, Indy Neidell.
And me, Burns.
And the Baseball History Time Machine.
Find yourself looking for a new job or change in career? Monster.com is here to help. We are not only here to bring you job postings, but also AI interview prep and salary tools, expert career advice, and top-notch resume services. We've got everything you need to land your perfect job fit. Discover the magic of finding the ideal job with Monster.com. Your future starts now. Visit Monster.com today. Your next job opportunity is just a click away.